What is going on, everybody? This is James Krasnarek here, and I am back for another sports segment on Real Steel Sports on Spreaker Web Radio. It's been a while since I've done one, but I pretty much enjoyed the rest of my summer and school starting back up, so the amount of segments I'm going to do hopefully is actually going to go up with the start of the NFL season and also with hockey season and basketball right around the corner. But I wanted to talk about something in particular because I just got done watching today's coverage of the U.S. Open. Actually, today would be yesterday. Basically, I just got done watching Labor Day's coverage of the U.S. Open. And I got a chance to watch the match between Roger Federer and John Isner. Now, Roger Federer takes a 5-1 lead in their head-to-head rivalry with his 7-6, 7-6, 7-5 victory. Now, you may think, well, what did that get me thinking about this? Well, anytime I really watch tennis with my dad, we always start talking about this and that and comparing players, particularly when Federer is the guy we're watching, because we get a chance to see what he can do, get a chance to see what he's about. And to be honest with you, pretty much no time do we ever watch a Federer match where we don't compare him to some of the all-time greats just because of the shit he can do on a tennis court. But I digress, because I wanted to talk about this. A little while back, if I can find the article here. Right here. Tennis.com did a Tournament of Champions. And in the Tournament of Champions, in the final, Roger Federer took on Pete Sampras. Now, the rules were such where a set was on clay, a set was on grass, and a set was on hard court. On the clay set, Federer won 6-3. I believe Sampras won the hard court set 6-4, which was the third one. The second set was 7-6 in favor of Federer, which was in favor of Sampras, which was the grass court one. But Sampras ultimately won 3-6, 7-6, 6-4. And my dad and I have had a huge problem with that pretty much ever since the article was released, because my dad's watched Federer and he got a chance to watch Sampras in his prime, and he got a chance to see both of them at the peak of his powers. And I'm going to make this statement right here. Roger Federer versus Pete Sampras, if we're talking about what would be the greatest men's match in history, Federer versus Sampras is a fucking joke. Yes, I said fucking joke. And I'm going to start elaborating as to why. For one, I'm going to give Pete his dues. 7 Wimbledons, 5 U.S. Opens, 14 majors total, the second most weeks at number 1, and 6 straight years at number 1. Those are some impressive milestones. Not even Federer has hit 6 straight years at number 1. But there are 3 reasons why Federer would dominate Sampras and 3 reasons why Sampras would get crushed. If you want to compare Federer to Sampras, because I see all the analysts all the time, compare the two players and say who would win if they played at Wimbledon during the days when the grass was fast or whatnot. To be honest, it really doesn't matter to me because I think Roger Federer, regardless of the surface, even if you played on the moon, I think Federer would still beat the shit out of Sampras. I do. I can think of at least 5 or 6 players in the history of tennis that in their prime would give Federer a better match than Sampras. Agassi would be one of them. Who else? Boris Becker would be another one. Trying to think of some other ones. Ivan Lendl would be a great example of that. Bjorn Borg. And the reason why I'm saying all these things is for this reason. Because let's look at how Federer and Sampras compare as tennis players. It's not even funny. Pete Sampras, if you look at what he did in the 90s, he won, I believe, 12 of his 14 majors in the 90s, and I believe 6 of them were Wimbledons. If you look at the way he played and the field he was in, there was a real reason as to why he absolutely fucking dominated men's tennis for a decade. Aside from Agassi, occasionally Ivanisevic, occasionally Evgeny Kafelnikov, occasionally the Spaniards, Carlos Moya and Alex Corretja, which were more prominent on clay. Sampras hardly had anybody he really had to deal with on a consistent basis. He rolled Kafelnikov, more often than not beat Ivanisevic, and even Agassi had a winning record against in the 90s. What I think needs to be said here is that Pete Sampras was in such a weak era in the 1990s. And people want to say, well, look at the great American players. Chang wasn't relevant past 96 and never really did well on grass. And other than a couple of really good major results, I mean, he was kind of an enigma. Jim Courier, great player he was, wasn't doing anything past the mid-90s. And Agassi was so in and out. I mean, from 97 to 99, he was literally invisible. Well, most of 97, 98, he got his ranking back up. But yeah, I wanted to prove is that let's just skip the whole era comparison. Because if we look at the era Federer's in with Murray and Djokovic, Nadal, and with Roddick, and even other guys that have snuck through won majors, Wawrinka, Safin was relevant for a while. Hewitt was relevant for a while. Del Potro. Let's just purely look at what would happen if they played against each other. 5 things would happen if Federer played Sampras. Number 1, I watched Federer play Isner tonight, and I think it was a good example because John Isner has arguably one of the most devastating serves we've seen in the history of the men's game. The fact that he's 6'10", and he can literally put a $140 serve right in the corner, and you can't do a thing about it. Federer was getting his 140s back like it was nothing, and was winning the point. What I think that speaks volume is the fact that the Pete Sampras serve is not going to scare him. You're talking about a guy in Federer who faced down Roddick 24 times over the course of their careers and only lost to him 3 times. A guy who hits serves 15 to 20, even 30 mph harder than Sampras could. And it just didn't faze him. There are certain things on a tennis court that Sampras does that plays in the Federer's hand. So number 1, the Sampras serve is not going to bother Federer. And Sampras would literally have to serve like 35, 36 aces to have a chance at winning. He would have to have an all-time historic serving day. The number 2 thing, when they go baseline to baseline, Federer is just going to absolutely just destroy him. Because Federer made the comment a little while back that guys like Hewitt and guys like Agassi made Federer better from the baseline early in his career because he was losing to those guys repeatedly. He didn't beat Agassi until the 03 Masters Cup in Houston, the year he finished number 2, and he had a couple wins over Hewitt, but usually they were either a result of Hewitt being tired or just not playing well. It wasn't like Federer really went out there and just devastated him like he did later on in his career. What needs to be said is that Federer's baseline game, whenever he was number 1 in the world, and the things that he could do from the backcourt, the things that he's still doing now, like I'm seeing Federer do shit now that I saw him do 10 years ago. It's not it's not even close. It's not even a fair comparison because the things that Federer does off the ground, Sampras' one-handed backhand was so defensive, even when he rolled over top of it, and his forehand was so ugly. And if Sampras has to rally 3 or 4 times with his forehand, he's going to miss the next one. His game's not designed to do that. But Federer's depth of ground stroke and the fact that Federer can just take a point over with his forehand just puts Pete at such a huge disadvantage. Really, I think it's ultimately unfair because even if you were to put them on a wicked fast hard court or even a really fast grass court like Sampras had in his heyday at Wimbledon, it wouldn't make a difference. Federer would still dominate him from the back of the court. The other thing is that when Sampras tries to come into net, he's literally going against a guy who's made a living out of passing people. If you just look up Federer trick shots on YouTube or just look up some of the shots that he's created and made over his career, and the way that he's able to just make people coming to the net look like absolutely nothing, it's ridiculous. Yes, I know Sampras is arguably one of the 2 or 3 greatest serve and volleyers of all time. Up there with McEnroe, up there with Edberg, up there with Becker, up there with the great Aussies of the 60s and 70s. The thing about it is this. Sampras will have to literally hit a perfect serve and a perfect volley every single time. He was able to get away with a lot of things versus other players in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. He was able to get away with a lot of them because they weren't really good at hitting passing shots. Federer can hit the pass on the run. He can slice it. He can dink it. He can drop shot you. He has such a full arsenal that when Sampras does get to the net, unless Sampras gets a sitter volley, he's going to be on his heels and probably going to be expected to hit about 2 or 3 more a point. And that's not the kind of game plan that Sampras used to win gets number 1 6 straight years in a row. Now the 4th thing is the Federer serve game, because Roger Federer's serve is probably the most underrated shot in the history of the game. We all praise his ridiculously powerful forehand, and we all talk about Sampras' serve and Roddick's serve, and even the serves of today's guys that are just giants, like Karlovic and Isner. And even the older guys like Ivan Isavic and Roscoe Tanner, if you want to go way back. The thing about Federer's serve is that he's not going to hit it overly big, and his knock percentage is not going to be higher than maybe 59, 60%. But his second serve is surprisingly effective, and his first serve, if you just look at the way that he was able to outserve his biggest rivals, on the big stages, the guys that he went against, he was able to out-ace them like it was nothing. If you look at a lot of times, he's played the big servers, like Roddick. He's out-aced them. And a lot of it may have to do with Federer's return, but if you look at it this way, Federer is still hitting serves on the other end. What he does in the return game does not impact his serve. He's still hitting aces. If you look at the Wimbledon final he won against Roddick in 2009, over 5 sets he hit 50 aces. I mean, Sampras never had ace totals that high, even in long 5-set matches. In fact, I'd probably be surprised if Sampras ever hit 40 aces in a match. Federer's hit 50 before, and I actually think he hit 40 another time too. The point is that Sampras had to go against some big servers in the 90s, guys like Boris Becker who just overwhelmed you with their pace, guys like Richard Krejcik and Murat Safin, guys who gave him trouble. But I think one thing that needs to be stated is that Roger Federer places his serve so damn well that he's going to know Pete's tendencies. He's going to know that Pete's going to want to come in. It literally gives Federer almost a head start on his serve to know where to put the serve. And when Sampras goes ahead and hits the return back, those short slices that may give some of his contemporaries in the 90s problems, other big hitting baseliners or even serve and volleyers, Federer's just going to eat alive with his forehand. He's going to eat those returns for breakfast. And I think finally the fifth thing we can look forward to seeing is the fact that Sampras would have absolutely no chance if they played against each other. In their primes, in their heydays, I honestly see no scenario anymore in which Federer is able, and Sampras is able to lose to Federer, because it's not a thing where you say maybe he could pull one out. I don't see it, because when we see Sampras play, and we watched a lot of his matches, Sampras wasn't hitting backhand winners on the run when he was put on the defensive. Sampras wasn't hitting drop shots against 6'10" opponents to try to get him off balance. Sampras' game plan was straightforward, and if he ever had to really deviate from it, his serve would have to bail him out. And it was come forward on literally everything, just attack on a short forehand, and that was just about it. That's all Sampras could do, because the way that their games are structured, Federer has the ability to do so many things. He can hurt you in every single possible way. Say his forehand's not working, he'll serve and volley. Say he's not getting in the net very well, he'll just hit winners off his backhand. He'll hit slice. He'll just play defense until you make a mistake. I mean, there are so many things Federer can do. It's like, basically I like to look at Federer as a combination of Sampras and his greatest rival, and I'd be Andre Agassi. And the reason why is this. Agassi would stand back there all day. He could be consistent as hell. He could hit winners from anywhere on the baseline. Federer has Sampras' movement, very fluid, big step movement, one point A to point B like nothing. The running forehand. He's got the serve that Sampras had. He had the ability to take balls early like Agassi does. If you want to just see what Federer can do, just watch the matches that he played against Roddick. And if you were to look at any of them, look at the 07 Australian semi. Roddick was playing some of the best tennis of his career, and Federer just blew him off the court. I've never seen Federer dominate anybody that close to him in the world rankings that easily. He just blew him the hell off the court. I mean, I know people want to say, well, Roddick has one major and Roddick didn't do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's a very valid argument. But here's the thing about it. Do you honestly think a guy like Sampras, who's maybe hitting serves in the high 120s at his peak, going to really hurt Federer? If Federer can get to the serve, it's coming back. I mean, Sampras' serve may have been overwhelming in the 90s because of how he could place just, anything, but I'll tell you this. Federer has so many advantages on the return, because I will unequivocally say that even in the era of Djokovic, and we saw it at Agassi and Connors, that Federer is unequivocally the greatest returner of serve I've ever seen. Ever. Because look at what he can do. If the serve is a little bit to the left, he can just stick his racket out, take some big steps, and pop it up. If it's 140 right in his midsection, he'll just deflect it away from you to the point you can't do anything with it. And again, Sampras is not equipped to handle that. Sampras is not equipped to handle a guy who's going to handle his serve the way Federer can. I mean, guys today like Djokovic and Murray and even Nadal would school Sampras from the baseline. I mean, Nadal would have a lot of trouble, probably have the most trouble because he's probably the weakest returner of the group. But here's the point. People always want to talk about Federer versus Sampras and what would happen if Federer versus Sampras actually could happen in their primes. And I say it's not even a question. Federer absolutely blitzes him. I mean, I think on grass at Wimbledon would be the best chance, and I think Sampras maybe could push him to 4 sets, but I still think that's pushing it because Sampras does not have the fortitude from the baseline to go toe-to-toe with Federer, and if he comes in on anything weak, he's getting past. I mean, let's look at the 2001 match they played against each other. Sampras was exiting his heyday on grass and actually played a very good match by his standards, going against Federer, who was just coming into his own and was literally so far away from the player that we're used to seeing on TV play Murray, Nadal, and Djokovic. He was so far removed from that. I'd say Sampras was far closer to his prime than Federer was to his. But we saw the things out of Federer that we get now. The ability to hit any shot, the big forehand, the ability to run things down, the backhand flicks up the line, the net game, the serve placement. We saw so many things from Federer in that match. And he was still a young pup. He was still a real young pup, so wet behind the ears. He'd never even made it to the... He'd only made it to the 4th round of a major once before, and it was the French Open, like in the previous French Open he played the year. I think he made the quarters. And if you look at what happened against Sampras, Sampras was still, he'd won Wimbledon the year before. He was playing not that well on grass, but in that match in particular, if you've watched it like I have numerous times, Sampras played a frickin' good match. He was able to save the break points with his serve like he did. He was able to come forward. But if you were to compare that, if you were to swap out that Federer and replace him with the one that went 92-5 in 2006, or even the one now that is at 34 years old, excuse me, at 34 years old, still at the top of his game, Sampras wouldn't have had a snowball's chance in hell. It's one of those things where Federer literally has so many advantages and so many things he can do. Backhand, forehand, drop shot, come forward, return a serve. Sampras has a good running forehand, can hit a decent inside-out forehand, can come the net very well, and can serve big. But that's literally it. Federer has played guys who can come forward, guys like Henman. He dominated Henman over the second half of his career. He's played guys with big forehands and big serves, like Roddick owns him, Isner owns him, Querrey owns him. He's played against big hitters, and Federer just sees right through all of it. I will go on record saying this: if Roger Federer and Pete Sampras were to meet in their prime on a clay court, the match would not last very long, and Federer would just destroy him. On a slow, hard court, Federer would still probably beat him kind of easily. On a quick, hard court, I actually think Sampras has a good chance to push him to 4, but that's probably about as good as it goes. And I will have to say that if they played on a grass court, I think Federer would pretty much take him out. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. I hope you guys enjoyed what I had to say here. And please be sure to always give me feedback and to hopefully take care and have a good one, everybody.